Several of you have asked about Dr. Eddie's website, and we just want to make sure that we encourage all of you to go to that website. I, for one, have just found it incredibly useful. There's the free downloads, and I think you had mentioned that, Dr. Eddie, that you can get that has to do with the little book. There's 4 chapters, I think, that I read through. And if any of you would like to order his book, we potentially could do a church order, sometime when it's not Sabbath, and get those for those of you that would like to have it. So, Dr. Eddie, did you want to open us with prayer? And I think we have a question. Yes, Claudia. Yes. Yeah.
Pandemic Busters. Pandemic Busters. Very good. Well, let's go ahead and pray. Our Father, as we learn how to keep our minds healthy, we pray that you may guide us. And we thank you, Lord, that we have this opportunity to learn more, and we just ask that your Spirit may be present and guide us in the name of Jesus. Amen. So this is my family. This is my 3 daughters, Talita, Elizabeth, Rebecca, and my wife. My wife was actually born here in Orange County, Florida. And a couple of years ago, I had so many invitations to speak around the world. I put together those invitations, and we went together as a family to 20 countries for the summer. And it was a great experience. We were able to, try different foods and see different cultures and see different ways of thinking and so forth. And at the same time, as we were doing, ministering to multiple types of people. So because we were gone for the whole summer, our place, when we were living in California, a bear came and did a hole in our home and helped himself to some healthy foods that are in the pantry there. And when a bear does this, it becomes dangerous. Because anytime he sees homes, what he thinks? Food. So the neighbor called the trapper so they could, catch this bear. And they catch this bear. There was an old washing machine we were trying to get rid of that was there close by. So they moved that washing machine to cover the hole while we were, back. And a second bear came, moved the washing machine, and finished what the other one didn't finish, I mean, they're pretty smart, these bears. It even opened the freezer and things, and get things from there. Even the maple syrup, put the paws and made a hole there and drank the whole thing. So that's what happens, you're gone for so long. Let me show you a few pictures from Mexico. Mexico is a beautiful country. This canyon, which is located in the state that is under Texas, the state is called Chihuahua, like the dog, that's the name of the state. This canyon is actually deeper than the Grand Canyon. And there's a train that you can take, and it goes there through the edge. Very, very beautiful ride. This is the end of that canyon. There's many volcanoes in Mexico. Many of them are still active. This is a town that got overrun by a volcano. And it's also a very fertile land, so they cultivate all kinds of things. These are some lavender fields. And there's also lots of water. especially in the middle and southern part of Mexico. And these formations that you guys have here, the cenote formations, so basically there's underwater rivers, and they dissolve the surface in very cold water, but very, very clear. And in the north part of Mexico, there's many deserts. It's totally the opposite. This is the famous Cabo. There's actually a good, thriving community of expats that live there in Cabo San Lucas. And look at these hot springs. You can be enjoying there the hot water while you're seeing the beautiful valley down there. And this is close to where I grew up. If you notice, there's no trees. Do you see that? That's why, to me, places like Florida are like, wow, so much greenery and so forth, because I didn't grow up where it was very green. Look at this beach. It's called the Hidden Beach. It's a special place. They're very careful. Not too many people can go there at a time. And this is where I grew up. Notice that there is no trees. Okay, there are some, but there's not too many. In fact, it rains there, 20 days in the whole year? Okay. In fact, when it rains, it's a disaster. The things flood and so forth. They close the schools and all kinds of things. These are the biggest natural crystals in the world. So there was this mine. They drained the mine, and this huge crystals form. It's really, really hot. You cannot stay there too long, just 15 minutes or so, because it's so hot. And out of this plant, they make a poison. That poison is called tequila. Avoid it. It's not good for you. So the way they do this, they cut the top part of this plant called the agave, and that's where they get the agave nectar. Agave nectar is good for you. So it's something, the process similar to maple syrup. You take that liquid that is called agua miel, and then you boil it, and that's what agave nectar is. And if you ferment it, that's what tequila is. Okay? So stick only with the agave nectar. That's good for you. The rest is not good. This is the tallest mountain in Mexico. You can actually walk it all the way to the very top. And these are some of the deserts in the northern part. And look at this special place. They have this algae that transform the water into this pink color. And this is relatively close to where Cancun is. That's where this lake is located. In the middle of Mexico, there's many forests. And this is another expat town. There's a lot of expats living here. This is called Loreto. And this is in the middle of the peninsula. It's an oasis town. So if you notice, everything is a desert, and then suddenly becomes green because there is some water coming from the mountains there. So many Americans and Canadians live there, as they retire. And these are some of the underwater caves in southern part of Mexico. And this is also a very fascinating phenomena. All the monarch butterflies from Canada and America migrate down to Mexico, to special forests, not everywhere, and they spend the winter there. And there are millions and millions of butterflies there during the winter. Something really special to see, so many butterflies. And this is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, have you ever seen the brain of a butterfly? It's a tiny little thing. How the butterfly knows that it's time to migrate down there. God tells them, hey, time to go south. And they go and obey. And There's still active volcanoes. This is around the middle of Mexico, and that's where you find this volcano. It's not all the time like this, but suddenly becomes active and then comes down and goes up and down. And there's this big volcano that when you land into Mexico City, many times you see the smoke coming up. Let's see if you can say the name of the volcano. It's called the Popocatépetl. It's an Indian name. Or you can say it by the short. They call him the Popo. So in fact, Popocatépetl, what it means is the mountain that smokes. So yeah, many times it's smoking there in this mountain. Tomorrow I have another seminar. If you have people that live near that area, or if you want to come, you are more than welcome to come. So it's going to be in Orange City, Florida. Okay? And we'll talk about inflammation. Most of the diseases, the root cause of the diseases are something called inflammation. We don't have time this afternoon to talk about that. We'll be talking about the next potential pandemic, and we'll talk about a different angle for dementia. What happened is that I am in the process of creating a program that is something like the CHIP program, but for preventing dementia. So there's a lot of material to share. I don't have time, this afternoon to share everything. So today we're going to share one of those angles, and tomorrow we'll talk about a different angle also. So there's the event there in Orange City, Florida. So if you have friends living in the Orlando area, let them know about it. And about the book, as Victoria mentioned, the book, you can get it because they were asking me. Well, I'll tell you in a minute. There's also this book that we made. This is a book for children. Today children are being bombarded by all kinds of marketing, trying to convince them to eat all this junk food and sugar and so forth. We need resources that encourage them into something positive. So we wrote this book, I Have the Flu, What Should I Do? And it's this nice little poem talking about the importance of exercise, of going to bed early, of avoiding sugar, and all these good behaviors. And literally last week, we finished our second children's book. It's called I Have the Blues, What Should I Do? Talking about mental health. As you know, many children are struggling with that. So they were asking about where you can get those free chapters. This is where you can get those free chapters of the book. Just go to healthwise.store, and then once you are in that page, go where it says free downloads. Okay? If you're using it in a cell phone, it's going to be on your top right menu. If you're using it in a website, it's going to be in the middle, in the top. And then just choose the language that you want to download. This list keeps on growing every day as new languages are being released. And also they were asking about this. So all the research is found in that ResearchGate page. And there's a Twitter account, there's the YouTube page, and there's the Instagram page. They are Eddie Ramirez. And some of the things that we put there on Twitter, this one, how chronic inflammation removes motivation. When somebody has this chronic inflammation, it affects your mood. It affects your ability to experience pleasure. And that's why we need to take that inflammation under control. Also, this very interesting study from the British Medical Journal, how most of the new medications are actually not better. They are more expensive, but many times the generic has pretty much the same effect, and you pay less. So be aware of this, don't, overpay, of something that you shouldn't be overpaying. And also this very interesting study about how music stimulates your brain. In fact, I've been involved in a depression program for 17 years, and part of the therapy is music therapy. It has a healing effect on the brain. And this other interesting study, how living close to the ocean gives you better mental health. And yeah, there's something, isn't it, special about seeing the waves and the ocean and so forth. It has a therapeutical effect on the mind. So again, it's all that in that Twitter and many, many more studies that I put there. So today we are going to be focusing on dementia, on the vascular health of dementia and prevention. So the goal needs to be able to prevent the dementia before it stops you. And you probably have seen, the sad image how somebody, when dementia comes, they start going downhill. And what can you do? Can you do something? Yes, you can. And that's what we're going to be learning about today. What I'm sharing with you is, as Isaac Newton said a long time ago, if I have seen further, is because I was standing in the shoulders of giants. And the giants that we're going to be standing are the major universities. There's some fascinating research coming up from these major institutions showing that there is something you can do about dementia. And what happened is that the medical paradigm is in the process of changing. See, in the old days, we had more of a linear type of paradigm. So you had a disease, we made a diagnosis, then we have a treatment, and it's something in a linear way. But as science has progressed, we have a new understanding that everybody is different. The cultures are different. The genes are different. So now we have a concept of something that is called personalized medicine, in which you customize things much more to the needs of the patient. So this is an example of that. This is my published paper. I did it together with Dr. Nedley, in which we were documenting the causes of depression. So depression doesn't come by one thing. It's the combination of multiple factors, the ones that are going to trigger you the depression. So you can end up with depression by nutrition factors, you can end up by addictions, you can end up by suppressing your frontal lobe, you can end up with medical conditions. It's multiple roads, and all of them lead you to dementia. To depression, the same story is with dementia. It's not just one way, there are multiple ways of ending up with the dementia. You can get the paper there from the ResearchGate. The full paper is there, and you can read it if you're interested in. So if somebody wants to get Alzheimer's, I'll give you the recipe. It's simple. Eat lots of sugar. Make sure you don't sleep enough. Don't you ever do any exercise. Make sure your hormones are out of whack. Don't have, good levels of vitamin D. And I can assure you, you're going to end up with something that is called type 2 Alzheimer's disease. I'll explain the types in a minute. So we need to be very careful, because in this life, our actions have consequences. Even if we don't like it, it's just the way it works. And it's like the Bible verse that says that everything we sow, we're going to harvest. So we need to be aware that our choices will have consequences. The statistics tells us that 1 out of 20 people over 60 will have the diagnosis of dementia. And as the person ages, 1 in 5 of people over 80 will have dementia. And the problem with dementia is that it's an expensive disease. See, the person with high blood pressure, I can see that patient, once a month and they're fine, But can you leave somebody with advanced dementia by themselves? No, isn't it? You need somebody to be looking after them and so forth. And somebody has to pay for that, And that's why as the cases increases, everybody loses in the society. And look at the projection from the National Center for Health Statistics. It tells us that in the near future, breast cancer will start to decrease a little bit, prostate cancer, heart disease, stroke, HIV, but what's in the increase? Dementia. And this is the sad reality, that we are going to see many, many more new cases of dementia in the future. Here are by numbers. Currently, we have 35 million worldwide. We expect to have 115 million by 2050. So if you notice, it's not just double, but more than that. And a question that I get asked very often is, Doctor, what is the difference between normal aging and dementia? That's actually a very good question, isn't it? So it is something as part of your living that you're going to be forgetting things because of what we were talking about this morning, because of neuroplasticity. As you don't use some of that information, it's okay, that you lose it because the grass starts growing back. For example, if you went down to the Pacific Ocean and you try, some exotic fruit there, and then 40 years later, I ask you, hey, did you try, this very famous fruit in this island in the Pacific Ocean? Oh, yeah, I tried it. What was the name? Man, what was the name? I don't remember. It's okay to forget, you don't see that fruit every day. But if you start forgetting, how do you call the apples and the pears and the oranges? I get worried. That you shouldn't forget because you are in constant contact with these types of fruits. So, normal aging, what happens is that, as the pathologists describe this disease, is as a tree that starts losing its leaves. And this shrinking that is taking place is the result of those cells in the brain. They get damaged and they start dying, and that's why that brain starts to shrink. So, dementia is that decline in the ability to process information, and that's going to be accompanied by changes in the personality and behavior. And if we don't put a stop to this, things will continue to get worse and worse and worse and worse. So you shouldn't wait until the last minute to start to make changes, because this is a process that takes many, many years to happen. So in order to diagnose dementia, what we need to do, we need to have different criteria that we use. One, the classic memory impairment. Problems, accumulating the new information, and problems accessing that old information that is in our brain. Two, problems at the level of the frontal lobe, problems recognizing things, problems using our mechanical abilities, and then problems with language. The person has a hard time finding the right word and so forth. And finally, the process starts to get worse and worse and worse and worse. So, we're going to be using interchangeably the word dementia and Alzheimer's. So, dementia is an umbrella term from different types of dementias. But Alzheimer's happen to be the most common subtype of dementia that we see more commonly. Okay? Even though there's many, many more. So, Alzheimer's disease goes through 3 stages. First, the mild. Starts with that forgetfulness. The person has lived in the same place for a long time, and they have a hard time finding their place. Even though they've been doing that, so many trips to the same area. The person starts forgetting how to speak certain key words, and the person starts to get lost very easily. They're very disoriented. They don't know, the year and so forth. And if we don't stop this is going to go into a type 2, in which you start seeing very significant memory loss. The person even starts forgetting their own loved ones. They're very sad to see that. And they start removing the inhibitions. There's things you just don't do. You don't come for breakfast without your pants and things like that. The person starts forgetting these types of things. And then it goes to the very sad stage of Alzheimer's, which is the severe type of Alzheimer's, in which they even forget how to speak. They even forget that they need to eat. Somebody has to feed them in the mouth. And if you bring somebody to me at this severe stage, I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry, I cannot do anything for this person. But who I want to talk to are the children of this person. Those, I know we can do something about it so we can avoid those people ending up at this severe type of Alzheimer's disease. So your brain is just like a boat. So when you are born, the quality of your wood, how good the boat in general is, those are genetics. But your lifestyle will determine if this boat will be strong or will be weak. So what you're doing in your 30s, what diet you are following, what level of stress you have, how much sleep are you getting? Are you gaining too much weight? Are you having insulin resistance? Is your blood pressure going up? So at this stage, we are planting the seeds of dementia, or we are preventing the dementia. And then by the time we reach our 50s, now we start to see the cracks to appear in the hull of the boat. And if we don't correct the inflammation, if we don't correct the atherosclerosis, if we don't correct the oxidation, this is not going to end up well. Because by the time we reach our 60s, the water is starting to seep in the boat, and sometimes it's at the stage that we could even try to remove the water, but it's just too much water, and this boat is going to have an early death. So, what about the famous gene for dementia, the APOE4? So, this gene is a gene of inflammation. people that have this gene, in the old days, they actually had an advantage. See, in the old days, we used to live in an environment that was very dirty. People didn't have good hygiene and so forth. So, if you had this gene in the old days, it was good for you. If you end up with a parasitic infection or bacterial infection, your ability to mount an inflammatory response was very beneficial. And you were likely to survive that because we didn't have, the antibiotics and all these things we have today. But the opposite happened today. Now we live in a pretty good, clean world. But now our lifestyle, the way we are living, is triggering that inflammation. And if you have this gene, your body responds much more aggressively to those bad lifestyle choices. That wrong food, that lack of exercise, that lack of sleep affects much more those people that have this APOE4 gene. And here's the statistic. If you come from a European background, it's about 1 in 4 the probability that you're going to be carrying this Alzheimer's gene. Now, carrying that gene is not a dementia sentence. It means you're at higher risk. It means you're closer to the precipice. So what should you do? You need to try to move as back as possible because you cannot be fooling around too much. You have very little room to wiggle. So you need to be extra careful about it. And this is a very good article here from the Lancet. So things that increase your risk for dementia. So you have the gene there. It's only 7%, the increased risk. Then your education. If you didn't have an opportunity of having, a lot of education, that's a risk factor. What can you do about it? Well, there's a community college. Go and sign up. You still have a mind. You need to challenge your brain, and it's okay, to sign up in your 50s, 60s, 70s, to go on and take some classes. Challenge your brain. Then hearing loss. This is a big deal because hearing stimulates very much the brain. Hypertension also, obesity, smoking, depression, physical inactivity, social isolation, as we're talking about today, and diabetes. So, this is the fascinating thing. There are some people that, as they age, their arteries look like the right side. Nice and clean, those arteries. But at the same time, there are people the same age whose arteries look like the left. What makes the difference? Is it bad luck? Not necessarily. As we're going to be learning today, this is directly related to the lifestyle choices that we make. This is what will direct which direction this is going. Same story happens with our cells that make and destroy our bones. How come there's people with weak bones? How come there's people with strong bones as they age? It's the same story. So you have those cells that destroy the cells, and at the same time, you have those cells that build the bones. So which side you're gonna end up has to do with luck. Again, not necessarily. What vitamin D level you have, how much challenge you're doing to your bones, or you're lifting weights and so forth. How is your sleep? Are you eating excess protein? That excess protein is poison to our bone health and so forth. So all these things have an effect and will determine which direction you're going to end up with nice and strong bones or with weak bones. So it is very similar to the dementia. And now we know that even infections are involved in dementia. So you have this inflammation pathway. There's some very interesting research coming out of there, how you have this, the brain has some nerves that go to the nose, and sometimes certain germs can climb up that nerve pathway to your brain and cause inflammation, what we were talking about. Even picking your nose is not good, okay? Because you can introduce some germs there that can potentially go up. So the same story occurs with the brain health. So you have a process in the brain that builds connections. You have a process in the brain that destroys connections. So what's going to determine which direction is going to go? This has to do also with the lifestyle that we have. Which of these processes we are going to encourage? So there's something called the APP pathway. And the APP pathway is directly related with inflammation. So when there's inflammation happening, you start breaking down connections at the level of the brain. So here are the different subtypes. Dementia, you can classify it in many ways, but this is one very good classification of the etiologies, of the causes of dementia. So you have the inflammatory, what we were talking about, by having an inflammatory lifestyle, or infectious. Remember the one with the nerves from the nose, how that infection can go up and cause an infection there. Then you have what is called the atrophic type. Atrophic type occurs when you don't have the right support for the brain to operate. For example, the brain is very much affected by issues of hormones. Okay? And this is one of the factors that puts ladies at an increased risk. Number one factor for Alzheimer's is age. Second factor is being a female. Because of the change of life, there are some females, not all of them, there are some females that may require that hormonal help. Okay? And in the same way, atrophic is multiple hormones. It's not just the female hormones. In the male is the testosterone factor. And unfortunately, lack of exercise, wrong type of food, alcohol, not sleeping enough, exposure to toxins is decreasing testosterone in many males. And that's why we need to be very careful with our muscle health. We need to challenge our muscles so that testosterone can keep up the right levels. So this type of dementia occurs when lack of those hormones are not there in the proper amount, and the brain cannot thrive in that environment. Also, another common type, thyroid problems. Okay? In fact, I've seen some people that, I don't like medications, but this is one that if you need to, you have to take it. There's no way around it. There's some people that have thyroid problems. and they don't want to take these pills. It's dangerous. You're going to end up with dementia if you don't take that, if you have thyroid problems. And then you have the 1.5, it's called the glycotoxic. And this one occurs when you have insulin resistance or diabetes. So it is dangerous not to control that diabetes. That type of people that say, oh, I'm going to take care of myself, except one day a week. I'm not going to take care of myself. Man, that's really, really dangerous. In fact, most of the brains of dementia, when you analyze them, they have insulin resistance in the brain. So you need to be very careful to control that. We'll talk in a minute what you can do. And then you have the toxic. So the toxic has to do with exposure to toxins. What is the most common toxin people expose themselves to? Happens to be consumption of fish. Today, all fish have mercury. There's not such thing as mercury-free fish. In fact, I've done research on the subject. In fact, in my study, I cite a study that said that every fish today has toxins. And then you have the vascular, in which we're going to focus this afternoon a little bit more. And basically, it's something that makes sense. If the pipes that go to your brain get clogged, it means not enough blood is reaching the brain, and the brain needs tremendous amounts of oxygen and nutrition. It's a very, very active, metabolically speaking, type of organ. So if you don't get that, your brains will start shrinking and they're not going to do good. And the reason why it's called also type 4 traumatic is because it's the same effect. If you have a significant hit to the head, you fall down and you hit your head, what happens is that your brain is going to bounce. So when it bounces inside your skull, you actually literally break some blood vessels, decreasing blood flow to the brain. So that's why it's the same process as the vascular problems affect your brain. So every day we need to make choices, and they have consequences. But look at the status of the artery health worldwide. Is heart disease something rare? No, unfortunately, it's the number one killer of people living in Florida. And not only in Florida, but in America, not only in America, but worldwide. And you can see here in this study, heart disease, cancer, stroke, lung disease, accident. When you correlate this to lifestyle, you're going to see that it is very much linked to the choices that we are taking, the risk of this. In fact, this very good article from the JAMA, they were documenting how tobacco is a big killer. Can you stop smoking? Yes or no? Yes, you can stop smoking. Diet and physical inactivity is the second trigger for early death. Can you change your diet? Yes or no? Can you start doing exercise? Yes or no? See, it's a lifestyle choice. And then alcohol, another risk factor. Can you stop drinking alcohol? Yes or no? Yes. And then microbes and toxins there. So 90% pretty much is lifestyle related. Now, how common is this problem? Well, look at these young men, what they're doing here. They're analyzing the arteries of the heart. This young man is 19 years old, and he already has heart disease. And this is the sad reality of the world that we live in. A lot of people start with heart disease very early in their lives. Look at this lady. She is 33 years old. Is that really old? No, still quite young. And look at her heart. Half of the artery of her heart is already clogged. Is that good or bad? That's really bad, because the heart attack and the stroke is really close to her. So the problem is that if you go and talk to this young lady and you start asking her for the classic symptoms of heart disease, she doesn't have any. She doesn't get chest pain. She doesn't get, she doesn't have problems breathing after she goes to a flight of steps. She is not, having this pain that runs to the arm or her neck and so forth. None of them. Yet she is in really big trouble. And look at this very interesting study that was done among those young people that died of violent deaths. And you can see that 78% of young people between 20 to 32 years old already had heart disease. In fact, in 21% of them, there was a 50% narrowing in some of those arteries. In 9%, 75%. And that's the reality. In the old days, a heart disease was something that you would see, in the 80s or so. Now, if you are in the emergency department, you're going to see people in their 30s showing up there sometimes with heart attacks. This is the world that we live in. And look at this paper. It said that almost all persons by the age of 10 already have damage to their arteries. And we're going to learn why this is happening this afternoon. In this other paper, it was been documenting how this problem, as it starts by the age of 10, continues. And the worst part is that many times you don't have symptoms and you don't realize you have this. Now, there are mummies that can teach us quite a bit of information. For example, we can take those mummified bodies and we can put them under the same studies that we do for the living people, the MRIs and so forth. And we can make diagnoses. Now, who were the mummies? Were that the average person that got mummified? No, it was the elite of the society. Those were the ones that end up being mummified. So let's go and play the doctor and see what diseases some of these mummified bodies had. What problem this one had? Overweight, What about this one? Cavities. They used to make this drink with a lot of dates, and it was like drinking a soda, Very, very, very sweet. What about this one? What problem he has? Stones in the gallbladder. Very common cause of surgery. Cancer. And notice this one. She is taking the clogged arteries and pulling out, the blockage out of this mummified body. And this is the way that it works. So, as the arteries start to clog, it comes a point that there is complete blockage. And when that happens, that's what we call, if it's in the heart, a heart attack. And when that happens at the level of the brain, that's what we call a stroke. Now, this is a way of cleaning up this. You have to break the ribs open and expose the heart, and then find the artery that has a problem, and look at the junk that they're getting out of this artery of the heart. Look at that. You think that's good? No, this is not good, and unfortunately is something quite common. Look at what it says in the Bible in Deuteronomy 7:15. And the Lord will take away from you all sickness and will afflict you with none of the terrible diseases of where? Of those mummies that we just saw in a minute ago, which you have known, but will lay them on all those who hate you. And said, if thou wilt diligently hearken the voice of the Lord your God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, what it says, I will put what? None of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought up upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. So as you can see, what is the will of God? What is the goal of God? Is that we avoid those diseases of the Egyptians. But in order to avoid them, we shouldn't live like the Egyptians. If you live like the Egyptians, you will end up with those diseases. And look at this statistic. This is one of the latest statistics. So you can see that heart disease, cancer, COVID-19, this was for 2020, unintentional injuries, stroke, lower respiratory diseases, and Alzheimer's disease there. One of the most important leading causes of death here in America. And sadly, heart disease and stroke kills many people. And many people don't even realize they have it, as we were talking about it a minute ago. So, in my book, I document a clinical case there. You can find this also in my ResearchGate. This is one of our patients that came to WIMAR, New Start program in California. Classic patient. Had problems with his weight, 381 pounds. He had a big problem with his diabetes, out of control. He was taking one medication for that. He was taking 2 medications for his blood pressure, and still his blood pressure was not good. 150/78. In 18 days, after making those right lifestyle changes, he was able to lose 16 pounds. We had to stop his blood pressure medication because his blood pressure came down to normal levels. We had to stop his diabetic medication because his fasting glucose came down to acceptable levels. Now, after he got better, he didn't say, I'm going to go back to my old lifestyle. No, he learned his lesson very well and continue at home living that healthy lifestyle. And you can see what happened to him in a matter of 9 months. He had lost 83 pounds and still continue not to take a single medication. And you can see here, 11 months later, his blood pressure, perfect, without blood pressure medication. His cholesterol, perfect. That's how I want to see your cholesterol. Your cholesterol should be 150 or less. That's what is called the heart attack free zone. And your LDL should be 75 and less. Anything higher than that is stimulating atherosclerosis. But the most surprising number is what is called the hemoglobin A1C is 5.5. It means he is no longer a diabetic. That is what happened in his life. And you can see after losing 141 pounds, he's no longer obese, he is no longer hypertensive, he is no longer diabetic. I published this clinical case in a journal from the American Heart Association. It's called Atherosclerosis, Thrombosis, and Vascular Biology. You can find it there on the ResearchGate page that I told you. So what I'm telling you is not something that, I've been working in these lifestyle centers for 27 years. It's not something that I've seen this every 10 years. No, every program we see this type of miracles as you apply, that right lifestyle. This is another interesting article that came out on BBC News, and they were documenting how 75% of doctors and 75% of patients don't know that type 2 diabetes is potentially reversible if we attack it as a cause. So what we need to do, we need to understand that our choices have consequences. And today, we have learned that we can stop many of the disease genes. Not because your parents had X or Y disease, that doesn't mean you're destined to have those problems. We can make the right lifestyle changes. So when we saw this ultrasound, the ultrasound sees things that we cannot see. So where are you with this? Well, it's a matter of checking to see where you are with that. And notice the U.S. surgeon says that 2/3 of the deaths in America are related to what? To what we are eating. And we are seeing a reflection of this on the arteries of the population. So what can we do? Well, let's learn what we can do. So first of all, let's understand that there's something called the endothelium. If you take an artery, you open it, the innermost layer is something called the endothelium. That is what it gets sick in heart disease. And as this researcher says, we age at the same rate that what? Their endothelium ages. And it makes sense because, see, every organ in your body is dependent on good nutrition, oxygen, and removal of toxins. How does that take place? It takes place through the blood. So when we have good blood flow, the body is able to take those nutrients and that oxygen to all the organs in our body. But if the arteries start to clog in, the interchange of that oxygen and nutrients cannot take place because they cannot cross, those arteries that are clogged in. And one of the biggest harms to your arteries is something that is called oxidized cholesterol. So oxidized cholesterol is what is poisonous to your arteries. For example, just like here in Florida, as I was driving here, I saw that there were some police on the side of the road, just making sure that everything is okay. If somebody's going too fast, something, bam, they go after them. In the same way, your arteries, you have on the edges, you have these white blood cells that are keeping an eye to make sure that everything is okay. But anytime they see oxidized cholesterol circulating in your blood, they go and eat it And this stuff is so toxic that what happens, that white blood cells stays in one of the arteries, dies there, and that oxidized cholesterol starts to accumulate in the artery. That's one of the pathways that you end up with atherosclerosis, with the closure of the arteries. So if you eat oxidized cholesterol once a year, it's not that big of a deal. But oxidized cholesterol for breakfast, oxidized cholesterol for lunch, oxidized cholesterol for supper, what are you doing? You are clogging and clogging in your arteries, and your arteries end up like this. Instead of being nice and smooth, you end up with all these peaks and valleys all over your arteries. So in our study, this is a paper that we published, we were demonstrating that people that have hypertension and that are taking medication, by the end of the 18 days of the intervention, 90% are able to eliminate or decrease dramatically their medication as their blood pressure starts to improve, because the arteries, in many cases, start to heal. And this atherosclerosis, as we mentioned, starts very early in life. The person continues to clog in their arteries, but because they don't have symptoms, they think that everything is okay. But not until you have a closure of about 80% of your artery, that's when the symptoms occur. And sadly, once the symptoms occur, the heart attack, the stroke, and so forth is just around the corner. So don't wait until you have a clogging in of 80% to start making these changes. So we know very well that cholesterol is linked to your risk of heart disease. The higher the cholesterol, the higher the risk for heart disease. And this is the principle. Cholesterol only comes from animal foods, okay? That's the only source of cholesterol. Fruits, vegetables, grain, nuts, they don't have cholesterol. So, in order to have good health, these are the 10 top foods to avoid because they cause inflammation. Processed foods, processed meats, red meat, chicken, which is the main source of cholesterol in the American diet. Butter and margarine, we'll come back to that in a minute. Fried foods, fast foods, cheese, pastries and sweets, sugary drinks, and alcohol, which is a neurotoxin. So, notice this very interesting study. So, this study was published in JAMA, one of the top journals in the medical world. And basically, they were comparing two groups. Both of them had heart disease. One group was following the usual counsel when somebody has high cholesterol. What do many times they tell you to do? Well, you're going to eat only white meats. Have you heard such counsel? You're going to eat only low-fat dairy. Have you heard that counsel? So these people fanatically, they were following that counsel very carefully. And they documented what happened if you follow that plan. If you eat like that, only 6% of the people actually improve. The rest of them are going to have progression of their atherosclerosis. The arteries will continue to clog in, 80% of them. In fact, when they follow them with studies of angiography, which checks, the health of the arteries, they found out that 3 years later, 41% of them, their arteries continue to clog in. 5 years later, 65% of them, their arteries clogged in. 7 years later, 77% of them, the arteries clogged in. And 10 years later, 85% of them, the artery continued to clog in. So here's the question, is that a good counsel? Good for the doctor because he needs to do more procedures, make not some money with that. But for the patient is not the best. And then they compare this group with another group that was following basically a plant-based diet that had maximum, and this is very important, 5 milligrams of cholesterol a day maximum. If you can follow that diet, and we'll come back in a minute to what is those amounts, after 1 year, people started improving. 82% of them following that plan, the arteries started healing and the arteries started opening back again. 14%, no more progression, which is at least is good news. That this is not getting worse. And only 4%, the clogging started to increase. And that has to do because there was a psychological, spiritual factor there, most probably. So those people that were eating that high cholesterol type of diet with the chicken and fish and low-fat dairy, only 5% of them, their total cholesterol improved. It doesn't work. Only 5% of them, their bad cholesterol decreased. It doesn't work. And in angiography, things started to get worse and worse and worse. So let's go and see cholesterol in numeric values. Remember, what did we say should be the goal? How many milligrams? 5 or less, okay? So 5 or less. So fruits, no cholesterol. Grains, no cholesterol. Nuts, no cholesterol. Vegetables, no cholesterol. Non-fat, 4 milligrams of cholesterol. 2% fat, 18 milligrams of cholesterol, 1 cup. Whole milk, 33 milligrams of cholesterol. And the only food in the animal world that doesn't have cholesterol is egg white. But it will increase both your total cholesterol and your LDL cholesterol. Mayonnaise, 8 milligrams. Ice cream, 29. Butter, 31. 1 egg, how much? You're eating your cholesterol for 2 months, in just 1 egg. In fact, Harvard University published a paper that demonstrated that eating eggs is equivalent to smoking as heart-damaging food. That is how harmful. So now you can be glad that eggs are so expensive. And then tuna, 26. Clams, 57. Crabs, 64. And here is the myth. Check it out. Chicken breast with no skin, how much? Is that less than 5 or more than 5? In fact, pig has 76. Beef, 80. And chicken with the skin actually has 82. Patient comes to me very frustrated and says, "Doctor, I'm eating so much chicken to lower my cholesterol that I think I'm even going to get some feathers on me." And I don't understand why my cholesterol doesn't come down. It's not going to come down. It's too much cholesterol, and you will continue to damage your arteries. Oysters, 84. Sardines, 120. Shrimp, 165. And internal organs are very high in cholesterol. Beef kidney, 329. Beef liver, 410. Caviar, 500. And the food that has the highest amount of cholesterol is the brain of the cow. Down in Mexico, they eat the brain, taco. I tell my friends, don't eat that. You're going to acquire the intelligence of the cow, from eating that. So even the American Heart Association is getting on the ball. This is what the American Heart Association is promoting today. That fasting glucose, keep it under control. Use a plant-based diet. Keep your weight under control. Do your daily exercise. Don't smoke. Keep your blood pressure under control. Keep that LDL nice and low. Very good counsel, Very, very good counsel. Something that we as a church have been teaching for a long time, Finally, they're catching up, They're finally catching up. Do you know that 80% of cardiac events can be prevented through education and lifestyle changes? This is from the American Heart Association. So, what can you do to reverse this? Well, look at this one. This is Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. I'm actually co-author with him in a nutrition book called Rethink Food. And this, on A, you can see the patient, it starts nice and thick, that artery of the heart, and then suddenly it becomes thin. Do you see it? The reason why it becomes thin is because they have tremendous plaque of atherosclerosis. Now, that's the same patient on B. What pill did he take? No pill. Look at what it says in the published paper. Coronary angiograms of the distal anterior descending artery, that's the artery of the heart. Before and after 32 months of what? Of a plant-based diet showing profound improvement. And the thing is that you need to put things into perspective. For example, you can do a bypass surgery. It's called bypass because the artery is clogged, so you bypass the blockage. How do you do that? You open the ribs, you expose the heart, you disconnect the heart and connect it to a machine that causes always microstrokes. And then you take a bisturi and you cut the leg all the way up, and then you harvest some veins, and then you sew those veins onto your heart. And guess what? Research show that in 1 or 2 years, those new grafts will start to clog in. So that's why when people say, oh, doctor, a full plant-based diet, that's too extreme. What's more extreme, the surgery I just show you or the diet? You need to put things into perspective, isn't it? There's another from the same paper. Look at that. The artery was clogged in there, and then it opened up in 60 months following that plant-based diet. Or this one also, notice how it was nice and thick, and then it became thin where the arrow is. And look at up how nicely it opened up that artery. And this other one, it was so thick, that atherosclerosis, you could barely see the artery, and now it opened up nicely. And this is something that happened in Norway. Never we have heard such a problem decrease. So Norway, if you notice, the amount of heart disease and strokes was very high in Norway. But in 1940s, the Nazis conquered Norway and took away the animal foods from Norway in order to feed their soldiers in the front lines. So they took away the lambs and the pigs and the cows and the chickens. So what did the people eat in Norway? Plants. That was your choice. And notice what happened regarding heart disease and strokes. Start to decrease dramatically the amount of heart disease and strokes. But then what happened around 1945? The war was over, and the cows return, and the pigs return, and the chickens return. And when it was around 1960s, 1970, Norway again regained the lead among one of the highest amounts of heart disease and strokes in the world. So you can see what happens when you make that change. So remember what we said, that the harmful type of cholesterol is oxidized cholesterol, remember? So how do you get oxidized cholesterol? Well, it's the same process from your bike. What happens if you leave your bike outside? It's going to get what? It's going to get oxidized. Okay, it's going to get rusted. So animal product that has been exposed to the air, that causes oxidation of that cholesterol. If the cholesterol is not oxidized, it doesn't cause any harm. For example, who has higher amount of cholesterol? Mother's milk or cow's milk? Human milk actually has higher amount of cholesterol. But how does the baby drink that milk? Comes straight out of the breast, into his mouth, no time for oxidation. That milk does not cause heart disease. So if you want to drink cow's milk that is not oxidized, now you know what you need to do. You need to hang from there. Of course, isn't it, for hygiene reasons, may not be the best thing to do, you know. So, and then we even make it worse. See, in the old days, when you milk the cow, what happened to that milk? It would separate, you know. There was a very whitish part, and there was a very, you know, part with neutral color that would separate. How come the milk you buy today in the market doesn't separate? Because it goes through this process in which, through a very small orifice, they force the milk, and that causes the mixture of these two parts, and that's why the milk doesn't separate. But what did you just did? Every single particle, you expose it to the heart, and you oxidize tremendously that milk. And then when you add something like sugar, you even oxidize that further, which sadly, that's the breakfast of many people. Sugar-laden cereal with milk, you're eating a lot of oxidized cholesterol. So in this paper, what they were doing, they were analyzing what are the foods that cause more atherosclerosis due to the fact that they had the highest amounts of oxidized cholesterol. So number one, custard mixes. What's a custard? Eggs, milk, and sugar. Man, tremendously inflammatory. Two, pancake mixes. Why are they so harmful? Well, if you read in the ingredients, one of the main ingredients is powder egg. So what are you doing? Every single particle of the egg, you are exposing it to the air, causing oxidation. 3, Parmesan cheese, and 4, lard. There's lots of wisdom when we learn that we can do something to avoid this problem. So as you can see, we can now start to make those choices not towards the blockage of the artery, but to the open up of the artery. And if you think that we're going to stop dementia by medication, I have bad news to you. The clinical trials have demonstrated that you cannot stop dementia with medication. There's only one medication. It works a little bit in a subgroup of patients, but those patients end up developing the dementia. So there is no shortcut. We have to deal with the root cause of the problem. So in closing, let me share with you this clinical case. Lady, 67 years old. She had family history with dementia, so potentially she could have carried that APOE4 gene. And when she is reading, by the time she finishes the page, she doesn't remember what she was reading. She was working as an executive secretary, and she was having a hard time keeping up. All the appointments and the telephones and everything that she needed to take care of. Even though she had lived for a long time in the same place, she couldn't get back home without the need of her GPS. In fact, she would carry this tablet everywhere. And one day she lost the tablet, and man, it was disaster, because then she didn't remember anything. So what she did, she started identifying the causes of her dementia, and she started making those changes in her diet, exercise, sleep, and so forth. And she noticed that her memory started becoming better and better. It had been years since she had such good memory. Now, she had a viral flu, and she got off the program and started eating, all these comfort foods and no exercise and so forth. And quickly she saw that the dementia symptoms started to creep in. That scared her enough to go back to the program. And by the time that they published the paper, she was 70 years of age. She was asymptomatic and continued to work as an executive secretary. So as you can see, there is hope for dementia. We need to make sure that our choices are in the right direction, and we need to be aware that our choices have consequences. So may God bless us. May we be able to avoid those diseases so we can have that energy to continue to serve God in this community. Thank you very much, and may God bless you. Let us stand up as we close with a prayer. Our Father, you have given us a wonderful body, and we need wisdom to take care of it in the right way. Help us, Lord, as we ask for your help. Give us the right type of will to choose what is right in your eyes. And help us, Lord, to be able to make those right changes at home. And help us, Lord, to help this community make also those changes. We're grateful, Lord, for this Sabbath. Continue to provide and sustain us as we go forward. And may you bless us in the name of Jesus. Amen.
You destroyed my diet.
Mm-hmm.